Hey, everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe, and as always, I've got Sunny here with me. If you're here, you're looking for the shortest route to being the most informed person in the room.
We take the sources, we unpack what's really going on, and we try to find the surprising connections.
And today, wow, we're tackling a really critical and I think deeply emotional question that came from one of our listeners.
Yeah, this one really stood out. Amidst all the international noise, the aggressive diplomacy, the little pinks attacks online, the trade wars, the listener asked a very simple question. What about the good Chinese people?
That question it really cuts to the core of what we do here, doesn't it? Because the international perception, it's so often dominated by these really aggressive narratives.
The wolf warriors, the punitive trade bans, this sense of a state-controlled monolith.
And actually look at the data. When you look at the real-world impact on actual people, that monolith just starts to crack.
And our mission today is to do exactly that. We're going to analyze the group that's often ignored, but is by far the most numerous. We're calling them the silent majority of China.
These are the people you don't see in the headlines. The diligent, the educated, the polite people who are just trying to live their lives.
But who are fundamentally trapped, and in many cases, victimized by the very system they live under.
And this brings us to the central paradox we really have to unpack today. It's this idea of the copper wall.
It's a striking metaphor, isn't it?
It is, and we're using it because it perfectly illustrates the strategy of the state, specifically the Chinese Communist Party, using its own population as a kind of human shield against global criticism.
And it is an intentional strategy. It's not an accident. The party essentially hides its political goals or even its military ambitions behind this sort of sacred shield of the people and the nation.
So when the party makes a decision, good or bad,
it's the innocent citizens who pay the price. The travelers, the small business owners, the concert organizers. They're the ones who bear the immediate cost for any political signaling.
And to really get why these good people stay silent, we can't just look at, modern surveillance or something. We have to go back. We have to talk about the Cultural Revolution.
Absolutely. That systemic historical trauma, it just destroyed basic social trust. It wiped out traditional Confucian ethics and created this cultural fault line that dictates so much behavior, even today.
Which brings us to this phenomenon. We're calling it the Voldemort effect.
It's a perfect description. When you talk to Chinese citizens overseas, especially, say, students or recent immigrants, and you mention certain names...
Like the Supreme Leader of the CCP?
Yeah. They visibly recoil. They might change the subject or walk away or even look like they're panicking. And it's not cowardice. It's a conditioned response.
Self-preservation.
Exactly. It's born out of a really pervasive political fear.
Okay, so we've structured this deep dive around 4 main pillars to give you the full picture. First, we're going to define this silent majority and, expose some of their surprising hidden political leanings.
Then second, we'll analyze how the party binds itself to the state and the people to create that copper wall.
Third, we trace the root of that deep fear back to the Cultural Revolution.
And finally, we'll explore the cultural differences, those fault lines that have developed between the mainland and, for example, Taiwan.
We want you to walk away from this discussion with a really clear understanding that the party, the government, and the people, they are separate things.
Despite the party's relentless, and I mean relentless efforts to make them all seem like one and the same. Let's jump in.
Okay, so let's really unpack this idea of the silent majority. Because if you only paid attention to international headlines or, God forbid, social media, you'd think that China is just drowning in this aggressive nationalism.
Right. But that's just the loudest voice. It's the most amplified one.
So who are we actually talking about here?
Well, we need to be clear. The silent majority are, numerically superior. They're the vast number of ordinary Chinese citizens. But they actively choose, not to speak publicly on political matters.
And that's a key distinction, right? This isn't like political neutrality.
Not at all. It's a pragmatic and, frankly, a highly rational choice. It's all based on a constant risk assessment.
It's just fascinating to me how the most visible groups, the aggressive nationalists online, the little pinks, state media, the diplomats, they're actually a pretty small, mobilized minority.
But they are so effectively amplified by the state that they completely dominate the global perception of what China is.
So what's the reality on the ground?
Oh, it's far, far different. The vast majority of people in China are focused entirely on the challenges of a quiet, ordinary life.
Right.
They're working incredibly hard, often within that grueling 996 culture.
9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It's insane.
It is. And they're raising their families. They're navigating these really complex social dynamics. And they're generally just trying to be polite, non-confrontational people.
And these are the acts of civility and, just pure diligence that never, ever make the news.
Because they're too normal.
Yeah.
But they're what actually sustains the entire society.
And that quietness.
Yeah.
That's the essential survival mechanism. You said it's a rational choice, but let's go a bit deeper into why silence is the default for, hundreds of millions of people?
It's a survival strategy that's been honed over generations of living in an authoritarian system. The perceived risk of speaking out, even on something that might seem totally benign to us.
Like a local complaint about corruption or something.
Exactly. Or even just a joke about a policy. The risk is just disproportionately high. That risk can translate to losing your job or these sudden targeted online harassment campaigns that just destroy your reputation.
Or worse, the political labeling that follows you and your family forever.
Right, so they prioritize not making trouble. That means avoiding any confrontation and staying strictly within the sanctioned boundaries of what you're allowed to talk about.
So their silence, it isn't indifference. It's a product of structural constraint. It's the ultimate cost-benefit analysis applied to free speech.
You've hit it exactly. They're effectively saying, the potential benefit of me speaking out is almost zero, but the potential cost is existential. It could ruin my life.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because there's some very sophisticated research, I think from places like CSIS and Stanford.
Yes, and it suggests that within this silent, pragmatic majority, particularly among the educated and high-income elite, there is a distinct and very suppressed political leaning.
A hidden current.
A hidden current is a great way to describe it. It's what we could call silent liberalism. The researchers, they targeted very specific groups, highly educated people in major cities, those with higher incomes, successful business owners.
So the people who, on paper, should benefit the most from the stability of the current system.
Precisely. And the findings were, well, they were surprising.
How do they even get this data? I mean, how do you get honest answers on political questions there?
They used these highly controlled, randomized online surveys, and they often embedded the political questions within larger, non-political economic polls to sort of reduce suspicion.
Clever. And total anonymity.
Guaranteed anonymity.
Yeah.
Which allowed for this unprecedented level of honesty. And the data showed these groups overwhelmingly lean toward two kinds of liberalization.
Okay, let's start with the political side. What does that look like?
It looks like a strong preference for classic civil liberties. For example, they support expanded freedom of speech, even if that speech might, occasionally lead to a bit of social instability.
Which is a huge red line for the CCP.
A massive red line. They also expressed overwhelming opposition to state interference in their private lives, specifically things like intrusive family planning policies. It shows the strong desire for personal autonomy.
So they want to be able to engage with the system, to talk about it without risking everything.
Correct. But the economic findings, that's where you see the most direct confrontation with current state policy.
How so?
This elite group, they heavily favor what's called economic marketization. When they were asked about state-owned enterprises, the SOEs.
Right, the huge state-run companies.
They showed strong support for limiting their expansion, arguing that they stifle innovation and they're just not efficient.
So they actively want to shrink the state's footprint in the economy. I mean, that goes against everything we've seen in the last decade.
It absolutely does. They also favored lower taxes and fewer regulations for private firms, and they expressed support for genuine market competition.
Even if it meant losing some social safety nets.
Yes. Some even showed a surprising willingness to increase the privatization of medical services. They would accept some cost inequality in exchange for what they see as demonstrably better, faster care.
Wow. We have to just pause on that for a second. That entire economic stance, limit the state, favor private enterprise, accept market risks, it is the philosophical opposite of the party's core goals.
Especially policies like common prosperity and that aggressive push towards state advance, private retreat.
Which has a name in Chinese, right? Guojin Mintui.
Exactly, Guojin Mintui. It's a systematic effort to give preferential treatment loans, political backing, monopolies to state companies, often forcing private firms to either become partially state-owned or just fold.
And the fact that the most economically influential and educated groups are the ones who actively oppose this, That shows a huge internal tension.
A massive tension. This silent liberalism isn't some fringe movement. It's like an internal corrosion of that copper wall.
They have the brains, they have the money, but they're suppressed.
Their silence is volatile. It's like a suppressed pressure cooker that runs directly counter to the ideological direction of the party. Their quiet opposition is structural.
So they're the potential engine for internal reform.
They could be, but only if that risk assessment, that calculation we talked about, fundamentally changes. Until then, they remain compliant, prosperous, and politically mute.
Okay, so let's move on to how the party actually leverages this widespread silence, this whole copper wall concept. It really hinges on manipulating identity. And that starts with the official propaganda.
Right. It's this enforced equation that the party equals the state equals the people.
And they just hammer that home constantly.
They do. And this binding, it's the core genius, if you want to call it that, of the CCP's control mechanism. They intentionally merge these three very distinct concepts, the political party, the government, and the citizens, into a single fused entity in the public's mind.
And what's the result of fusing them all together like that?
The result is an instant defense mechanism. If you criticize a government policy, let's say a restrictive economic measure.
It's not seen as a political critique.
No, it's instantly framed, both at home and abroad, as harming the feelings of the Chinese people. Or even worse, as an act of subversion that endangers national security.
It's an ingenious rhetorical trick, isn't it? If I, sitting here critique a diplomatic move, they don't have to defend the move itself.
No, they don't.
They just point the finger back at me and say, I'm anti-China, which means I must be anti-Chinese people. It makes any external criticism morally complicated and domestically basically impossible.
It gives the party an immediate moral high ground. They force critics into a dilemma. You want to attack the regime's actions, but if you do, you're seen as attacking the sacred shield of the entire nation and its people.
The analogy is so powerful. It's like hiding your military gear behind a hospital or a school.
It is. You either strike and incur this massive moral and human cost, or you back down. It's a deeply unethical transfer of responsibility onto the people.
Let's break down the strategic goals the party achieves with this, using its people as a human shield.
Okay, the first, and I think the most crucial goal, is responsibility transfer. The party insulates itself from accountability.
So if they mess up.
Right. If they make a huge diplomatic blunder, or if the economy slows down because of bad policy, they don't have to admit they made a mistake.
Instead, the hardship that follows is framed as what?
A collective sacrifice. A necessary pain to withstand aggression from external hostile enemies. The people pay the price, but the party takes credit for enduring the struggle.
So the narrative shifts from the government failed us to we, the nation, are strong enough to endure this attack from the West.
Precisely. And the second goal is maintaining that moral high ground. The shield ensures external critics are always hesitant. They're paralyzed because they know that attacking the party means being seen as attacking the population.
Which would just cause huge PR damage and feed right back into the party's internal narrative of victimhood.
Exactly. See, they hate all of us.
Okay, let's make this concrete. This is where the self-inflicted harm becomes really visible. The sources detail the costs that citizens bear, especially in moments of, say, high political tension with another country.
And these real-world costs are painful and they are immediate. Let's take the example of tourism bans. Say a Japanese official makes a controversial statement about Taiwan. The CCP doesn't just issue a diplomatic protest. They might issue severe travel warnings or just effectively ban organized tours to Japan overnight.
And who actually suffers from that decision? It's not the Japanese official.
No. It's Chinese citizens. The immediate victims are the countless Chinese tour operators, the travel agents who lose their deposits, the hotel staff in China who depend on that business.
And, of course, the travelers themselves, people who've lost their planned holidays, their money, their savings.
Right. The policy is designed to punish Japan, but its immediate economic impact is internal. It causes massive financial loss to domestic businesses and to its own citizens.
And this tactic bleeds right over into the cultural sphere, which hurts the silent majority just trying to live their lives.
Absolutely. The cultural blackouts are a perfect example. A sudden, totally unexplained cancellation of a major foreign artist's concert.
Like a Japanese rock band was supposed to play in Shanghai.
And suddenly, it's off. It's a direct response to some geopolitical signal. The party just silences that cultural exchange, sacrificing people's entertainment, the venue's revenue, all the related industry jobs.
All to make a political point that the foreign target probably doesn't even notice?
Or care about. The venues, the local sound engineers, the ticket sellers, millions of young fans, they're the ones who pay the political price. It's the ultimate internal sacrifice for external signaling.
The irony is just. It's profound. These measures are fundamentally self-inflicted harm.
They are. They might cause a minor diplomatic headache abroad, but they significantly strengthen the internal story.
Which is?
That true patriotism requires immediate personal sacrifice. You must sacrifice your trip, your concert, your money for the greater good of the nation, which, of course, is inseparable from the party. It's a cruel model because it demands the majority function as a permanent political buffer for the regime's mistakes.
Okay, so if the copper wall is the defensive structure, then its foundation is pure historical fear. We absolutely have to talk about the shadow of the Cultural Revolution. We're talking 1966 to 1976. This isn't just history, is it?
No, it's the operating manual for modern compliance. It is the defining political trauma of modern China. Scholars, they universally agree it was a catastrophe for Chinese civilization. The word in Chinese is haoji.
A catastrophe.
And it wasn't just political instability. It was a decade of intense state-sanctioned political paranoia that was designed to systematically dismantle the traditional social contract.
What specifically was the core damage that still lasts to this day?
Oh, the destruction was multi-layered. But it focused on dismantling the very foundations of trust, family structure, community trust, and traditional ethics.
Can you even imagine a world where children were politically rewarded for criticizing and reporting their own parents for counter-revolutionary thoughts?
And students were encouraged to denounce and publicly shame their teachers, which often led to their imprisonment or even their death.
That systematic destruction of respect for family, for teachers, it must have just eliminated any sense of social security. You couldn't trust your neighbor, your colleague.
You couldn't even trust your own child.
Yeah.
And that is the lasting psychological legacy. It created this deep-seated political trauma, and it instilled a core political lesson that's been passed down through 3 generations now.
And that lesson is?
Any collective action that is not explicitly sanctioned by the state, or any public critique that deviates from the party line, carries unpredictable and potentially fatal risk. People learned that vigilance and silence are the only guarantees of survival.
And that lesson, that ingrained fear that feeds directly into the Voldemort effect we see all over the world today.
It does.
Why do Chinese citizens, especially students and tourists overseas, immediately avoid or recoil or literally run away when sensitive topics like the party or the supreme leader are brought up?
Because for them, it's not a casual conversation. It's a high-risk scenario. It is conditioned self-preservation. It's not shyness or political apathy.
It's a logical response.
It's a direct, logical response to the reality of pervasive transnational repression. They know that what they say, even thousands of miles away from home, can trigger consequences back home.
The fear is the risk of being recorded, reported, and having that information sent back through these surveillance networks.
Precisely. And the mechanism of that fear is brutally effective. Let's talk about the most insidious tactic, which is using family as hostages.
Right.
An overseas student might post a neutral or even just a slightly critical comment on Twitter. They're physically safe in, say, London or New York. But their family back in Shanghai or Chengdu gets a police invitation.
Just an invitation.
A friendly chat or a warning. And the implication is crystal clear. Your speech overseas results in domestic pressure and potential punishment for the people you love most.
It's a way of extending that authoritarian grip across international borders.
Absolutely. The surveillance infrastructure is transnational. It extends through digital monitoring on platforms like WeChat, where everything is logged. It also functions through physical proxies. Sometimes even seemingly benign groups like the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations on foreign campuses.
Which have been used to monitor and report on their own peers.
In some instances, yes. And we can't overlook the intense political sensitivity around the Supreme Leader himself. The extreme censorship around coded words just reinforces the idea that any discussion is dangerous.
You mean things like Winnie the Pooh or steamed bun?
Exactly. We're talking about censorship so precise that simple, seemingly random phrases like those instantly trigger high-risk political flags because they reference the leadership. This level of pervasive vigilance ensures that the silent majority, globally, maintains total self-censorship.
Even when they're supposed to be safe in Western democracies.
Yes, this is the enduring structural power of the trauma that was wrought by the Cultural Revolution.
Okay, let's shift our focus to culture now. We often hear this argument, particularly from critics in Taiwan or the diaspora, that the cultural essence remains in Taiwan. Now, given the mainland's thousands of years of history and just its sheer scale, that is a highly provocative claim. What does it actually mean?
It's crucial to understand this claim isn't about physical relics. It's not about who has the oldest temples. The argument is that the CCP created a fundamental cultural nuancing, a fault line, during the 20th century.
A fault line, okay.
So critics argue that while the mainland retains the geographical and the archaeological heritage, Taiwan preserved the unbroken integrity of the ethical framework, the educational system, and the classical literary tradition inherited from the Republican era.
So what were the specific losses in the mainland that Taiwan managed to hold on to?
Well, let's start with language and script. The mainland systematically transitioned from traditional characters, Fantisi, and the old phonetic system, Bopomofo, to simplified characters and Pinyin. That started back in the 1950s.
And the argument is that this wasn't just an efficiency upgrade.
No. Critics argue, often quite passionately, that this reform severed the younger generation's direct link to classical texts and original literacy. They contend that the aesthetic complexity, the history embedded in the traditional characters, which Taiwan kept, are the pure carriers of the Chinese literary and philosophical tradition.
So it's a break in the cultural lineage. People can no longer easily read, say, original Han Dynasty poems or Ming Dynasty novels.
Precisely. But I think the most significant loss relates to core moral values. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just political. It was about destroying the ethical operating system of the society.
Things like Confucian values.
Yes. Values like Wen Liang Gong Zhen Rang, which means warmth, kindness, respect, frugality, and humility. And the Republican era 4 pillars of Li Yinjai, propriety, righteousness, integrity, and a sense of shame. These were systematically rejected and suppressed.
And those values, they form the bedrock of civility, of social trust, of individual moral autonomy.
Correct. And when the CCP later tried to revive Confucianism, critics charged that it was purely instrumental. It was a tool to enforce social order and political obedience, not a genuine, evolving ethical tradition.
And Taiwan, having separated after 1949, just integrated those same frameworks into a new democratic education system.
Right. Positioning itself as the preserver of traditional, unpoliticized Chinese culture. The critique also points to the abolition of certain national symbols, like the traditional Father's Day or the Republic's double 10th National Day.
Small details, but they emphasize that purposeful break in continuity.
They're symbolic breaks. And the suppression and destruction of Confucian temples and ancestral shrines during the Cultural Revolution contributed to this feeling of a cultural void. The key difference is that Taiwan is seen as preserving the cultural continuity and the ethical framework that promotes individual moral autonomy.
Which is fundamentally viewed as incompatible with the party's demand for total political subservience. That being said, we have to provide a balanced view here. It would be totally misleading to suggest that the mainland lacks cultural depth. It possesses assets that Taiwan, just because of its size and history, simply cannot match.
Oh, absolutely. We have to emphasize that culture is vast and multifaceted. Mainland China holds immense, irreplaceable heritage that's tied directly to its massive geography and its unified, multi-millennial history. This is where the sheer physical reality comes into play.
Okay, so give us some examples that anchor the mainland's unique cultural position.
Well, consider the geographical and monumental depth. We're talking about non-movable heritage. The sheer scale of the Great Wall, which is a foundational symbol of civilization. The vastness of the Tibetan Plateau, which anchors these unique philosophical and religious traditions.
And the unique landforms like the karst mountains or the bamboo forests.
Right. The spectacular Sichuan bamboo forests. Taiwan simply cannot replicate that scale or that variety.
And the origins of so many of the world's major traditions are still rooted there.
Yes. The mainland holds the massive historical and religious centers. Shaolin Temple in Henan, the recognized birthplace of Zen Buddhism and Chinese martial arts established way back in the 5th century, or the massive Wudang Mountain Taoist complexes. These monumental sites reflect a continental history and a centralized power that are unique to the mainland.
And of course, we have to talk about the food. The unparalleled culinary and regional diversity is just an inescapable fact of mainland culture.
Absolutely. The mainland's vast internal borders give rise to this incredible regional distinction, far beyond what any single island can achieve. The 8 great cuisines.
I mean, we're talking about massive variation. The bold, numbing heat of Sichuan hot pot versus the complex, subtle flavors of Cantonese cuisine.
Or the earthy simplicity of Northwest Chinese noodles and lamb dishes. These are geographically dependent. You can't just move them.
So the conclusion isn't really about physical artifacts or cuisine. The fundamental tension is between a cultural heritage that is free to evolve and be interpreted versus a culture that has been systematically politicized.
That's it. The debate boils down to the integrity of traditional ethics and the freedom of thought. The silent majority, while they enjoy the culinary and geographical assets of the mainland, often secretly yearn for the stability and integrity of the ethical framework that they perceive as being preserved somewhere else.
Okay, let's turn now to the group that generates all the international visibility. The little pinks, or Zhao Fenhong. We have to define them clearly and analyze what's truly driving their aggressive online behavior, especially since they do not represent that silent majority we've been talking about.
Right. The term started out as a pretty specific description. It referred to young, female, nationalistic netizens, but it's generalized now. Today, it describes aggressive, often highly organized online nationalists, mostly younger users, who act as digital vigilantes.
And they attack any perceived critic of the CCP overseas.
Any critic. They're often called the modern Red Guards.
Why is that analogy so potent?
Because their function is analogous. They serve as non-official digital attack troops for the state. They organize these collective online crusades. The term is zhuzheng against foreign media, international brands, celebrities, anyone who violates the party's political red lines.
And they're highly organized. This isn't just random anger.
No, not at all. They use domestic platforms like QQ groups and online forums to coordinate their attacks across international platforms like X, Facebook, and Instagram.
On the surface, it looks like pure ideological fanaticism. But our sources suggest there's a much deeper, more complex mix of psychological and economic drivers. What's really fueling all this anger?
It's crucial to look inward. The aggressive nationalism is often a projection of deep internal anxieties. The core motivation is tied to individual powerlessness and failure.
Which is heavily influenced by that hyper-competitive domestic environment we mentioned earlier.
Right. This connects directly back to the crushing 996 work culture and the subsequent counter-movement lying flat, or tangping.
Ah, yes, tangping.
Exactly. The lying flat movement is a kind of passive resistance against intense social inequality, overwhelming career competition, and just declining economic opportunities. Many of the little pinks are young people who feel this frustration acutely.
Their sense of individual failure is immense.
It is. And instead of challenging the system that created this inequality, they project their frustration onto external forces.
So they get a sense of power and identity, a feeling of being successful and respected, not by achieving their own career goals, but by participating in this nationalistic collective.
That is the key psychological compensation. They transfer their personal anxiety, their lack of power, their disappointment in the job market into an external ideological conflict. By defending the national image online, they feel respected, they feel powerful, and they feel part of a winning, influential team.
A feeling they often lack in their own individual lives.
And the state is brilliant at manipulating this. It's a genius strategy of state manipulation, funneling all that corrosive domestic anxiety outward. This external conflict stabilizes the internal political environment by providing a perpetual distraction and a perpetual external enemy.
They're the cutting edge of the copper wall.
They really are. They are low-cost, highly effective economic warfare agents. They pressure international brands the instant those brands cross a political red line.
Whether it's recognizing Taiwan or mentioning human rights in Xinjiang, or just a designer who jokes about the leader.
Right, like the backlash we saw against brands like Intel or Walmart, forcing them to issue these groveling apologies or pull products from their shelves.
So what's the ultimate result of all this?
The ultimate result is that the little pinks significantly raise the political risk for any foreign company operating in China. They force global brands to pay a higher risk premium for market access. Or, increasingly, they're pushing companies to diversify their supply chains out of the PRC entirely.
So this aggression, ironically, is accelerating the structural division between China's economy and the liberal global democracies.
A strategy that plays right into the hands of those who are seeking to de-risk from China.
So the little pinks, while they believe they're defending the nation, They're actually being used by the state to impose costs on the silent majority.
The very people who rely on those multinational corporations for jobs and economic growth.
And they inadvertently push global trade away from the PRC. It's the copper wall weaponizing its own frustrations against itself.
It's a deeply complex and paradoxical system.
Okay, let's bring this entire deep dive to a close. We started with the question, what about the good Chinese people? And what we've established, I think, is that the vast majority, the silent, polite, diligent population, they're not indifferent.
No, their quietness is a rational, historically conditioned response to a profound level of political risk.
And we found that the noise, all that aggressive nationalism, it's a tool. It's used by the state to protect itself, that copper wall strategy, and it comes at the expense of its own people.
And that fear, the Voldemort effect, it's rooted in the Cultural Revolution's systemic destruction of social trust, and it's enforced today by a global system of transnational repression that leverages family ties.
And while that debate over cultural essence will continue, the choice between the mainland's monumental scale and the preserved ethical integrity of traditions elsewhere, the critical takeaway, for me at least, is that the culture that matters most to the silent majority is one that allows for independent thought.
And for moral autonomy, something that's currently incompatible with the party's demands.
As always, our goal here is to provide objective facts and analysis. We are here to critique systems and structures, not people.
And we encourage you to always seek that distinction, the difference between the aggressive actions of a regime and the constrained lives of its populace.
When you look at the complexity of it all, the fact that the most influential demographic, those educated, high-income, silent liberals, are already adopting a kind of passive resistance against core economic policies, it just raises a massive question about the stability of the entire system.
And here is the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. Since the Chinese regime's stability is inherently built on fear and on economic performance, and the anger of the little pings is currently channeled outwards.
Right.
What specific economic failure, maybe a sustained real estate collapse or a complete erosion of youth employment, might be severe enough to cause that outward-focused nationalism to turn inward and actually challenge the party's legitimacy at home?
When does the human shield finally become a mirror? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you.
If you love this discussion and you want to become better informed, please hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss our next deep dive. And while you're at it, check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life, for some really fun memes and travel vlogs. Until then, stay curious.